Now, when it comes to the top tier, obviously we have to be size appropriate within our borders. So you saw me piping the scroll work earlier on that piece of perspex, excuse me, and I used a number 44 piping tip from PME, and we'll be using that later on. However, because of the size of this tier, and we are talking quite a small tier, it's only 4 inches, I've reverted down to a PME number 4 piping nozzle. Now, here I want to be able to put 12 double C's in here. So remember, it curves this way, so I'll roll into the curve. So I'll put the first one in, and then I'll go in and I'll put one more inside it. Now, when it comes to putting the line on top, remember the line I talked about for line work? I always do the inside one first. It's easier to give a tighter curve to it, so I'm just going to pipe that on there. I'm going to pipe the one on the back one. Now, something to note while I'm doing this is things are going to be really quite close together. So you have to make sure when you overpipe one, you don't take the top off the other one. And what I mean is, it will be very easy for me to start piping there and knock this one off. So I'm piping almost directly from above to get it in. Try to keep them as uniform as possible, but at the end of the day, we're not a machine. But we're looking for some sort of uniformity. And again, if you're noting, I'm wiping the end of this piping tip or nozzle off after each time I pipe. If the end of the piping tip is not clean, you're likely to get it sticking to other bits of icing, and that will cause you problems. Now, the icing I'm using here is soft peak roll icing. I could have done this with a plastic bag. However, I feel I have more control when it comes to something this small, because the smaller bags, I mean, I'm using it almost like a pen or a pencil. I'm almost writing with my icing. Squeeze that down a bit. Now, we'll have the age-old problem in a minute. How do I pipe the last one without killing the first one? The answer is carefully. So be aware that I have to fit 2 into that slot, the double. I won't have to worry about joining them up because there is more piping to do on here. So I'm going to get as close as I can, and then I'm going to use my paintbrush to push it into place. So at this point, as you can see, it's not even attached to the cake. But if I go in like that with my slightly damp paintbrush, I've now pushed it into place where it needs to be. So as you can see, we've now got, a little bit stuck there, we've now got our 12 bits of border around there. We now need to work on the side because I need to build this border up to be more elaborate. So we're going to take a moment, move the camera around so you can see what I can see. So now I've still got my number 4 piping tip, that's a PME piping tip. Now we're going to pipe a rope under here. Now I said to you earlier on you need to roll into the curve. We're actually going to reverse that because as a design decision, if I roll towards the cake here, I get better sticking power. It adheres itself better to the cake. So I'm going to attach it here and then we're going to roll it under here. and finish off. So I'm going to move on to the next one. What this does is just adds another texture to this border. And it gives quite a pleasant finish to it. Something I tend to do a lot when I'm working on a cake is I will always sketch the cake out first. I'm not the world's greatest artist, so we're talking stick figure pencil drawing here that no one's ever going to see. However, drawing a cake is an essential part of the design process. It means you get to work out which order things need to be done in. It also helps you with your cake mapping, helps you with your timing. They're very important things to do. So don't be scared of reaching for pencil and paper. Just 2 more to go. So again, I have to be careful of number 1. So when I get close to it, I'll sort of stop, leaving that spike in midair, as you can see. I'll just use my brush just to tap it in so it's nice and secured. So that's that one done. Now we're going to look at the C scrolls I showed you, except I'm going to do them in what I call a cresting fashion, which means they're going to come up over the top of these, and I need to go and I need to get my number 44 nozzle. So I'll be back in a second with the 44. Now, when it comes to the larger one, the one that I actually said was Lambeth inspired, although I call it an English overpiping border, we piped this shell. Now, in real life terms, these were piped about an hour ago. So yes, raw icing will crust. This will be firm to the touch, but inside it'll still be soft. So just be aware that if you press too hard on it, you could dislodge it. We're using a PME number 44 piping tip. We're going to pipe a C scroll over the top, and it curves in that direction, so I'm going to roll towards the cake. I intend starting here and ending here, so roll that over the top, immediately go in and pipe the line that sits on top of it. Take my damp paintbrush and go in and just tidy up that end there, because if you don't, it's going to cause you a problem later. So just keep that going. As you've seen, sometimes you don't have a tail you have to clean up on. Sometimes you do, so it's always ready. It's always good to be ready for that. There you go, there's another one that needs to tidy up. Best to do your housekeeping when you go along. Also, you'll notice that habit again. Yes, my fingers are covered in icing. And why is that? Because my piping tip and my nozzle are not. And that's a good thing. It means I get cleaner lines of piping. So here we go, we're coming round to the last couple now. Now, after I've done the mirrored work, which is the next thing we're going to be looking at, I will be coming back to this border because there's even more that needs to go on there. Now, obviously that's built up quite high on the first one, so again, be very careful. Twist your wrist so you can actually get into that gap and try not to damage it too much, which I've just done showing you how not to do it. So as you can see, I've swiped it. I've got line work on the top of this anyway, so do the best you can to repair it. It's only my first line of piping. I'm going to clean that off there. Right, as you can see, my hands are all covered in the icing, but that's not a bad thing. I would much rather it be on my hands than actually on the cake. Now we're going to move down now, and the barrels we have at the bottom, we're now going to put S and C scrolls on top of them, although they are actually going to be mirrored work. So remember, my S will come over the top of this barrel, and the tail will come under that one, and then I'll be piping a C scroll in here. So I'll show you one on this first one. It'll depend on you as a designer whether you want the join to be in the middle of there or in the middle of there, and you'll see what I mean when I've piped the first one. So that's a conscious decision to make now. Okay, I'm going to start with it in the middle of here. So I'm going to roll up over the top of this one. I'm going to come across and draw it under the next one. So that's given me my basic S shape. I'm then going to go in and I'm going to pipe my S scroll there. Now, as I said on the top tier, I like to overpipe my tightest curl first, which is that one, which enables me to pull this one up over the top of there and almost stretch it and tuck it down there. Now we need to do the other side. Now, obviously, if you're a left-handed person, this will be easy because for you that's the natural way. But for me, instead of holding my hand at this angle, I'll turn it to hold the other way. So hopefully I can get this scene on camera for you. So I'll roll over the top of here and I'll draw it under there. And then I'll go in and I'll do again, I'll put the C in there. I'm then going to overpipe the C. And then I'm going to overpipe the S. Tucking that nice and neatly underneath. Now, no matter how good you are, you're going to get these little spikes here where it ends up. Spend a little time, tuck them down, make sure they're nicely cleaned up. And this is what I mean by mirrored work. So that entire third of the cake now has these mirrored pieces on it, and that will be ready for doing the line work. So I'm just going to finish off these other two, and then I'll come back and we'll actually put in the top bit on this border. So as you can see, I've now done the mirrored panels around here, but I just wanted to clarify what I meant about putting the heads or the tails in the middle of a panel. Now, as you can see on this panel here, I have the heads coming through. On here, I've got the tails centralized. Now, I as a designer liked it that way. It could be that you put these heads in the center of here. If, however, you hadn't made that decision, you could put the head there and then you would have totally thrown the design off. So that's the importance of actually sketching your cake out first of all, just so you've made those decisions so you don't just get on there and pipe and you've ended up with something that you cannot rectify. For me, we're going to have a small rose there and I wanted that to be the focal point of that position. Now, I did say we were going to come back up and do more work on these. So my next thing is I'm going to use another PME nozzle. It's called a 57S. It's meant to be for piping blossoms or roses, and we'll be looking at piping those in a future lesson anyway, but we're going to use it now to pipe something which I call a blade, or some people will call it a frill. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pipe it so that it starts here, wraps around and ends here. I am going to need the brush to tidy each of these up, so bear with me while I do this. Attach it, and then with a small jiggling motion, you're going to bring it up to the end. Just make sure that you tuck it in there. You want to make sure it's fully secured. Now, this is the sort of thing that it's never going to look the same twice, so don't aim for complete and utter uniformity. You're not going to get it. The thing you do need to make sure, however, is that when you look at it, you can't see light through it, because if you can see light through there from underneath, it means it's not secure and you need it to be secured, because immediately we're going to pipe something on top of that in a moment. See, again, for me here, it's not connecting properly to the large shell. So I just want to make sure that's fully secure, because my worst nightmare would be it to fall off the cake. Again, it's happened there. And it will happen. It's just the nature of the beast, to be honest with you. It's the way things happen to happen. Just one more to go. Now, this is just part of the effect. What I'm now going to do is I'm now going to pick up my number 4 piping tip, and I'm going to now pipe another C, but this time it's going to curve downwards and it's going to lay on top of this one, the frill I was talking about. And I'm going to have to pipe an overline over the top of it. Okay? Take that paintbrush and touch that down. Now later on, we're actually going to be putting a smaller C inside that, so make sure you leave enough room to put that in there. I think it's important to note at this time too, that when you're building up borders that are quite heavy and elaborate, your worst enemy is gravity. So when you design your cake, try to allow some drying time between the different sections. Now, if the border is supported, like this one is by the cake below, it's not a problem. However, if I'm trying to defy gravity as I am here, I need to make sure I consider I need a bit of drying time, because once that raw icing is crusted, it'll be fine, it'll hold itself up. If I went straight on and just built and built and built, the problem would be it would just start travelling down the side of the cake, which would destroy all your hard work. And here's the last one. So there you go. That's given us the foundations. It's built up our next layer of piping on here. Now in the final design, you've seen that we've got some off pieces on this cake. They're the elaborate pieces I do separately and attach. You also see we have some what I call cocktail stick roses. So that's our next challenge. Let's look at the next lesson and see how they're done.